Okay, let's get back to those carbon wars, because they're going to end, according to Labor leader Anthony Albanese. Big speech today, the National Energy Guarantee, that's the policy he borrowed from Malcolm Turnbull, and the clean energy target. Voters didn't like them, and now Labor are rejecting them as well. The speech was pushing for bipartisan agreement on a whole range of things, including new power generation. But for all the claims of bipartisanship, he ruled out nuclear, he demanded more money for a whole lot of renewable projects, and he once again pushed on more money for the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, something the coalition was elected to abolish. On coal, he was lukewarm, as I said, pushing it all out to the conference in December, well after the Queensland state election. And he had a real go at the coalition climate sceptics. Joining me now for his analysis and all of this is the Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly. I watched the speech, Paul Kelly. I can't say there was much in the way of bipartisanship. He mouthed the words, but all the fundamentals were still different between the two parties. Where do you think this is headed, and how much of this do we see through the prism of him doing his best to try and win back support in Queensland and keep someone like Joel Fitzgibbon on Labor's right on side?
Well, in terms of the fundamental point of the speech, Anthony Albanese inviting Scott Morrison to sit down with him and negotiate a new bipartisan energy policy, that won't be happening. Scott Morrison won't accept that invitation for two reasons. He feels there's no policy need to accept that invitation, which of course highlights the fact that there are significant policy differences between Labor and the coalition on this issue. And secondly, of course, this would be going back to the policies and politics of the Abbott and Turnbull period, which Morrison wants to avoid. And it would, to a certain extent, be opening up tensions inside the coalition parties again, which we, of course, saw in 2018 over the National Energy Guarantee. So there's going to be no grand bargain negotiated between the two leaders.
Right, well, I want to ask you then, how do you assess Albanese's performance overall to date? We've got the Eden-Monaro election coming up. That's a test for him. And obviously there will be other fights, state-level contests, etc. this year. But how's he going?
Well, look, I think this is a really fascinating speech today. Now, at the start of the year, we thought that the bushfires would define the climate change debate. But what became very clear from Albanese's speech today is that Labor is framing the climate change debate in the context of the COVID-19 crisis and the recession. And there are some really fundamental conclusions which underpinned Albanese's speech today. The first was that he wants to project as a leader of cooperation, conciliation and bipartisanship. This was the fundamental assumption. And essentially what's happened here is he's seen Scott Morrison use the politics of cooperation in managing the virus, and Albanese wants to buy into the politics of cooperation, or what he calls the politics of bipartisanship. Secondly, he's going to approach climate change in terms of renewables and jobs and investment. And this is the way climate change will be seen during the recession. It's going to be a debate about jobs and investment. That's where he was trying to take it. Thirdly, he wants to try and get a better balance internally in terms of Labor politics between the different factions and between the different schools of Labor thought on climate change.
All right, well, just on that point, the internal ructions, I mean, out of Victoria's crisis last week, there's an infection to the federal politics for Labor. He's of the left, the Victorian leaders of the left. There's concern about some sort of power-sharing deal. The unions are buying themselves in. The very controversial CFMEU head down here in Victoria, John Setka, wants to get himself involved. Now, given a whole number of Labor leaders have tried to curtail Setka's power, it seems extraordinary that he would come out of all of this branch stacking sort of scandal last week and come out stronger, not weaker.
Well, I think that's going to be one of the fundamental issues here. Now, I mean, certainly the right is going to be weakened in Victoria. There's no question about that. And there's a lot of concern about right-wing figures in Victoria about the way all this will play out. And certainly I think Albanese's capacity to contain factionalism in the party is going to be tested, and it's going to be tested at the federal level, particularly on some of these critical issues like climate change. And what he's attempting to do on climate change is to hold things together. I mean, essentially what he's doing here is he's offering both sides of the internal Labor debate concessions on this issue. Clearly, when it comes to emissions reduction, Albanese will have ambitious targets, far more ambitious than the coalition, but at the same time he's talking about carbon capture and storage. He's going to be making those sort of conciliatory noises because he knows he's got no chance of winning the next election unless he improves the vote in Queensland. And that means he's got to reposition when it comes to climate change. That won't be easy.
Hence all the coal talk today, but no coal actuality till after the Queensland election. Paul Kelly, thanks very much for your analysis as always.
Thanks, Peter.